So in this segment, I want to talk about Victoria Derbyshire, talking about how her father was violent, and I guess her kind of understanding of what it'd be if she was in that situation now, and the country had gone into a lockdown, because there simply isn't enough help in general pre-pandemic, but also now post mid-pandemic. There isn't a lot of help for people who are stuck in violent homes during a lockdown. So if we look at this article here, is she written by her? Yes, written by her. So it says, growing up, I remember my whole body tensing every time I heard my father's key in the back door. What mood would he be in when he came home? Would he provoke an argument? Would it lead to him hitting me, whipping me with his belt, or just slapping me around the back of the head? I was fortunate I could escape sometimes to my best friend's house down the road to get out of the way. And the next day, my father would go back to work again, and I'd be in school, which meant respite from the disruptive shouting and cruel violence. The love in our lives came from my amazing mum, who did everything she could to make up for his failings. And you get some amazing parents out there who have to put up with stuff like this. When the Prime Minister told us we all had to stay at home because of the coronavirus, one of my first thoughts was for those who are living in abusive households, women, men, and children, essentially trapped, forced to stay inside week after week. What would happen to them? Spending the last few months finding out about the reality of domestic abuse under lockdown has been shocking, but I've also met women who've courageously escaped during the challenging circumstances. I've spent time inside refuges, which were full, meeting support workers on the ground who were under pressure, and talking to people who were subjected to levels of abuse they often hadn't experienced before. So essentially, she's saying that during the lockdown things have gotten worse. The violence has gotten worse. Jess, I think that's obviously not her real name, had been with her violent husband for many years. During the relationship, he'd assaulted her multiple times, punching her, strangling her, controlling what she wore and how she styled her hair. She says she had to ask his permission to make a cup of tea and even go to the toilet. Like, this is a horrible situation. But when lockdown was imposed, the violence escalated to extreme levels. Like most of us, Jess and her husband were watching Boris Johnson as he instructed the nation to stay at home to stop the spread of COVID-19. It was then that he turned to her and said chillingly, "Let the games begin." Like, this guy's an absolute sociopath. Her story was one of the most brutal I've heard. She told me he raped her more than 100 times. Curtains would get closed, the TV would be up loud, the front door would be locked, music would be turned up so nobody could hear me screaming. She recalls he burned the top of her legs with cigarettes so no one would ever want her. Like, that is horrible. That's a horrible story. Today will be the last day you see the sunlight. So BBC Panorama has learnt the intensity of abuse escalated in lockdown, offences including poisoning and strangulation. Women's Aid has been working on the first in-depth research project about the effect of confinement had on domestic abuse. Of the people spoke to, almost two-thirds of those living with their abuser said the violence got worse, and three-quarters said lockdown had made it harder for them to escape. Meanwhile, calls to the Respect Men's advice line for male victims had increased by 65% during the first 3 months of restrictions. For some, the pandemic was used by their abuser as a form of control, which makes sense. If it's more difficult for you to go outside, they can be like, where are you going? Like, you can't go outside. There's a lockdown. You can't see your family. There's a lockdown. So it's a horrible situation to be in. When I asked Jess what the stay-at-home message meant to her, it simply said death. 3 weeks into the lockdown, her husband declared today will be the last day you see the daylight. She knew she had to get out of there. She feared she'd be leaving her home in a wooden box. So effectively, it got to the point where she thought she was going to die. She had to get out. When I was around 12 years old, I remember running to the police. What? I think this is talking about Victoria Derbyshire, I think, here. When I was about 12 years old, I remember running to the police station after my father locked my mum in the bedroom and began beating her up. I was scared he was going to kill her. Our phone had been cut off because he hadn't paid the bill. Another way of trying to isolate us from our family and friends. I ran as fast as I could. I ran as fast as I could, the mile or so to the police station, out of breath, pleaded with the officer behind the desk to come help. But in lockdown, some of those in violent relationships struggled to even pick up the phone to dial 999, let alone run for help, because their abuser was at home 24/7. So, for example, if your abuser was furloughed, there would be no point in the day during you could do this, because they would always keep an eye on you. Jess knew she had to get through to the police somehow in order to save her life, but she couldn't alert her husband. While he slept on the sofa, she googled how to contact the police without calling them, terrified he would wake up. So After texting registered to 999 and receiving an initial response, she sent them her address, and officers arrived within minutes, which is, it's good news that, she was able, the scheme that's enabled her to do this, and, officers got there quickly. Panorama had found in the 7 weeks of UK lockdown, someone called the police for help about domestic abuse every 30 seconds. That's both male and female victims. That's crazy. That is crazy, like how often this, domestic abuse is happening in this country, especially. It's gotten worse now. It took the government 19 days after imposing restrictions to announce a social media campaign to encourage people to report domestic abuse, as well as an extra 2 million for domestic abuse helplines. I wonder if that's anywhere near enough. So Fiona Dyer, I think that's how you pronounce her name, chief executive of Solace, one of the biggest providers of refuge spaces, told me the government inaction and slowness to respond made the incredibly challenging period even more challenging. If you look at who was in the cabinet, it's a lot of very privileged men, so maybe it's not an issue they think about, and it's very possible that no one in the cabinet actually thought that this would impact people, domestic abuse victims. I doubt this was one of the things they actually spoke about. I haven't met one survivor, one charity worker, or domestic abuse advocate in the last few months who said they've seen any evidence the government in England had considered the effect of lockdown would have on those living in an abusive household, and I think that is the case. But Safeguarding Minister Victoria Atkins denied they were slow to act. The government was alive to the risks of domestic abuse. Was talking to charities in the early days and very much responding. She told me, responding, what did you do? What were your responses? I'm sorry, we don't have money. Like, what did you actually say? That's what annoys me about, these sorts of articles, and these government responses were like, oh, we were alert and we knew what was going on. So you knew what was going on. What did you do about it? Because the 2 million you've given to phone services is great. They can actually get more calls, but where they're going to tell these women or tell these people, these are the safe places for them to go to. Ridiculous. In the nearly 3 weeks between the introduction of lockdown and the government launching its You Are Not Alone campaign, 11 women, 2 children, and a man were killed in alleged domestic abuse cases. That's a lot. That's a lot. Responsibility for those deaths lies with the perpetrators, but could lives have been saved had the government acted more quickly? It's possible. A review would have to be done at some point. There will have to be time to reflect on lessons learned across the pandemic, Miss Atkins told me. She also said that she was working to scrap the October deadline requiring charities to spend the emergency government funding they received. Jess had to leave her home. This is about the woman we spoke about earlier. Had to leave her home, and her only option was to try and find a place in a refuge. Her life has since changed at one in Wales, run by the charity Lamu. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Has been transformed thanks to the support after the dedicated staff and caring fellow survivors. So the UK potentially faces a further coronavirus spike and more local lockdowns as we head towards winter. Solace's Fiona Dyer said the UK government had to make sure that there's robust sustainable funding for future services. My parents got divorced when I was 16, and that's when we escaped the violence, but not all domestic abusers leave their home. Why should they have to? Others can't because they are terrified their abuser will come after them. Many simply can't afford to go because they aren't financially independent. For those like Jess who did take the step during the lockdown, it's been liberating. I feel safe, I don't feel threatened, I can go to bed at night knowing that nothing is going to happen to me, and I'm glad she got out. But that situation, no one should have to live in a situation as long as she did. And I've done a video in the past talking about how it's actually more expensive to allow domestic abuse to go on than it is to actually do anything about it. They've looked at the numbers, how much it costs to fix broken bones, for therapy and all that stuff. So it's actually cheaper to help domestic abuse victims. So it's further evidence about why the government say that the government should be doing far more to actually help domestic abuse victims, because in the long run, if you're fiscal conservative, it's cheaper, and you're actually helping someone's life. This is someone's life, and you can say that, well, people say that it's their fault for being in the abuse. It's no one's fault, because they do manipulate and they do control people. Like, if you're in a situation where if you try and escape, you can get killed, you're really rolling the dice on, are you going to be safe? Effectively, that person, Jess, she had no option but to go, because she was gonna be killed. Her boyfriend or husband, whatever he was, is an absolute psycho. He was burning her leg with cigarettes and stuff like that. Like, what? Like, the guy's insane. And I don't know if he's been arrested. It doesn't say in this article. I hope he has, because he could do that to other people. And so, the government has to do more to help abuse victims. It just has to, because you're failing people, vulnerable people in society. And so, I'm I won't leave it there. Big, massive credit to Victoria Derbyshire. I know her show got cancelled as well, which is a damn shame for the BBC to do that, because it's not a show I watched. I watched, but she does good work like this, and so it's an invaluable show. And so she does try and help domestic abuse victims. She does listen to people. I think she wrote down the number on her hand at one point, so people can see the number and call the helplines. And so I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Massive shouts out to Victoria Derbyshire for covering this and talking about her own experience, as difficult as it must be. But a lot of people have a story to tell, and they're not always good. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.